Joining us now is Rebecca Traister, a writer-at-large for New York Magazine, who's been reporting on John Fetterman's Senate campaign. Rebecca, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So I want to know what you thought of this debate. One of the things that you have such a thoughtful and incisive way of kind of presenting how Fetterman is trying to work through these health issues in the context of running probably the highest stakes Senate campaign in the country. And one of the things you posit in your article is that Fetterman's campaign is hoping to turn his sort of vulnerability into an asset here. Do you think he did so on the debate stage tonight?
I think it's tough to say whether or not it will wind up being an asset with voters, but it was certainly an example of such remarkable transparency, the opposite of what the Oz campaign has sort of asserted, which is that he's somehow hiding something about his health. I mean, showing up for an hour debate, and it was, as he said, starting out, he said he was going to talk about the elephant in the room. You played the clip. He said, I'm going to miss words. And you could tell, I wrote in my story about how in my interview with him, there was a moment where he became frustrated and stressed out, and it made some of his communicative problems worse. And I think that this context, and what you described as the insanely high stakes of this election, this single debate, clearly this was a candidate who was feeling stress, and there was such intense scrutiny, often ableist scrutiny, on how he was going to communicate. And he just did a debate in front of, the nation, an audience of anyone who could listen. And it was so transparent. He did fumble. He did make verbal mistakes. And it was all on view. And I cannot predict whether that will help him or not. I know from my reporting that I was doing over the past, 6 to 7 weeks, that voters were responding to his public appearances, to his rally appearances, to his speeches, to the fact that he was doing interviews, including with you here several weeks ago, very warmly. How will that come up? How will that, follow this debate? I cannot predict. But I think it's also really interesting. You played a lot of clips. There were moments where he was really strong, including that Bernie Sanders clip, including his very fluent and direct response on raising the minimum wage. I thought was a really strong moment for him. He had some really, really strong comebacks, and his opponent, Oz, was, first of all, he also fumbled, right? I fumble on television, right? So there is.
I definitely fumble
on television. Oz was
on
nervous
television.
and hesitant at first, too. Yeah, I mean, this happens, right? But Oz also was really slippery in his presentation and in terms of what he was saying. I mean, I was sort of bowled over by how frequently and fluently Oz lied or refused to answer, and gave answers that I thought were just terrible. The one that you played about abortion, was one of them, I think, where he said that the decision should be made between women doctors and their local elected officials. I mean, that is a terrible thing to say.
And yet, I think some people are going to think, oh, Oz is bucking party orthodoxy by suggesting he's not going to vote for a federal ban on abortion, a.k.a. Lindsey Graham's 15-week federal abortion ban. What did you think of that part of it?
Yeah, I thought that was also a little slippery because, like many things, he actually refused to say, on this day I would vote against Lindsey Graham, right? He wouldn't give them that solidity of an opinion, right? So he did say he would not support federal legislation on abortion. But I thought it was really interesting. The line that actually jumped out at me more than the one you just played and that we just talked about is he actually invoked his role as doctor. There's another clip from the debate that's worth looking at where he says, as a doctor, he's really offended that we would interfere with the state's right to decide about abortion. And he said he actually used his, he wasn't saying like, as someone who really believes in states' rights, I would never. He said, as a doctor, I would never interfere with the individual state's ability to govern whether or not a person can have access to a safe abortion. It was sort of a wild juxtaposition of his medical experience with his deep belief in every individual state's right.
Usually a state is not involved in the decisions made between a patient and her or his doctor. Therefore, the statement, well,
yeah, he had a weird medical practice, apparently. Yeah.
One more, Rebecca, the crime piece. You bring up Fetterman's background, which I think a lot of people don't really understand vis-a-vis crime, and the ways in which Oz has tried to tether Fetterman's vulnerabilities to also being soft on crime. Do you think that that's any more an effective line of attack, given what we know of Fetterman's background and the person he is, just sort of categorically is not a weak person? And I think no matter what his recovery processes looks like, the man does not look enfeebled.
No, he doesn't. And actually, you know, it's very interesting because I was thinking about that tonight. So much of the initial attack that Oz made on Fetterman about crime has to do with his work on the parole, the clemency board, and granting clemency, including to two brothers who work on his campaign now who were wrongly convicted and served 27 years for a murder that they did not commit. And it has nothing to do with sort of crime statistics around the country. It is truly a bait and switch argument that is rooted in a lie. Fetterman himself has actually been very friendly and pro-police. I think more pro-police than a lot of progressives would like him to be, right? But it is also true that we know that a right wing, no matter how dishonest and no matter how sort of morally corrupt, and false right-wing attacks on Democrats for being soft as crime, which are always racially coded and often gendered too, softness, weakness, right? You know, this stuff is resonant. People reach for those kinds of weapons because they're effective in a country that responds to racism and to sexism as communicative tools to take down a candidate. Fetterman, you know, is such an interesting candidate in part because it's very hard to imagine using this kind of racist and sexist language against him. But, you know, I think we have to see that. I think his responses tonight on crime, you know, were pretty communicatively effective. But this is, you know, very sweet candy that Republicans are selling to a country that is so deeply built and attuned to messages that are fundamentally misogynistic and racist in nature.
I would say candy with a poison center. Rebecca Traister, writer at large for New York Magazine. Yeah. Rebecca, thank you for making time for us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Alex.